The CEO's heir laughed so loudly that even the crystal chandeliers seemed to shake with him. He waved a fake mop like a trophy, bowed theatrically to the quiet woman everyone ignored, and declared she would probably spend retirement polishing the company's floors. Then the founder slowly stood, took the microphone, smiled as if he had been waiting years for this exact moment, and said 7 words that made an entire boardroom forget how to breathe. The office woke up long before the city did. While downtown streets still reflected the pale blue glow of dawn, Meridian Dynamics was already breathing through the quiet rhythm of elevators, humming servers, and freshly brewed coffee drifting from the employee lounge. Every morning followed the same invisible choreography. Security guards exchanged greetings with the cleaning staff, analysts hurried toward glowing monitors, and assistants balanced tablets, folders, and impossible schedules before the executives even arrived. Among them walked Eleanor Brooks, carrying nothing more remarkable than a weathered leather notebook and a paper cup of black coffee. She never hurried, never demanded attention, and never looked around to see whether anyone noticed her. After 19 years inside these walls, she knew something few people ever understood. Companies weren't built during applause-filled presentations or glamorous shareholder meetings. They were built in ordinary mornings, when small problems were quietly solved before anyone powerful realized they had existed. Eleanor had become one of those invisible solutions. She corrected reports before clients saw mistakes, remembered details forgotten by department heads, trained young employees who later received promotions, and protected projects from collapsing without ever signing her name beneath the success. The maintenance crew knew her because she always thanked them. The receptionist knew her because she remembered their children's names. Even the overnight security guards trusted her enough to ask advice about college applications or family troubles. Yet by the time the executive floor filled with expensive suits and louder voices, Eleanor disappeared into the background as though the building itself had quietly absorbed her. That Monday carried a different atmosphere. 3 weeks earlier, the company had officially announced that its legendary founder, Richard Heir, would retire after 42 years of leading Meridian Dynamics from a tiny rented office to one of the country's most admired technology firms. Since then, the building had transformed into a polished stage where everyone seemed determined to impress someone. Conversations ended abruptly whenever a vice president walked past. Department heads suddenly volunteered for projects they had ignored for months. Assistants whispered about seating arrangements for the retirement ceremony, while the communications team argued over every word that would appear on the giant screen behind the stage. Yet beneath the excitement ran another current that everyone pretended not to notice. The future of the company had become the favorite topic behind every closed conference room door. No official announcement had been made, but hardly anyone doubted what would happen. Richard Heir had a son. Nathan Heir had spent years climbing through executive positions with astonishing speed, and most employees assumed the final title had already been chosen long before the retirement speech was written. "Blood always wins," someone muttered near the elevators that morning. Nobody argued. It simply sounded too familiar to challenge. Nathan arrived just before 9, exactly when the lobby became crowded enough to provide an audience. His tailored suit fit as though it had been designed for magazine covers rather than business meetings, and his confident smile suggested he considered the building less a workplace than an inheritance waiting for paperwork. Employees greeted him with polite enthusiasm. Department directors stepped aside to let him pass, and several younger managers laughed a little too quickly at jokes that barely deserved a smile. Nathan enjoyed that reaction almost as much as he enjoyed reminding people where they stood. His eyes found Eleanor near the coffee station almost immediately. She was organizing folders for the quarterly operations review, completely unaware that she had once again become today's entertainment. Raising his voice just enough for half the lobby to hear, he called out, "19 years, Eleanor! That's longer than some companies survive. Tell me, are you planning to retire from the same desk, or are you waiting for someone to finally notice you've been here?" A ripple of laughter spread through the crowd. Eleanor looked up calmly, offering nothing more than a polite smile. "Good morning, Nathan." Her answer only encouraged him. "That's what I admire about you," he continued, pretending to sound sincere. "Unshakable loyalty. Some people call it dedication. Others call it refusing to leave the parking lot while everyone else drives toward the future." More laughter followed. Several employees lowered their eyes, embarrassed enough to feel uncomfortable, but not brave enough to interrupt. Eleanor simply gathered her notebook, thanked the barista for the coffee, and walked away without changing her pace. She had learned years ago that silence often outlasted arrogance. Few people noticed the only person who hadn't laughed. From the glass balcony overlooking the lobby, Richard Hale had paused halfway to the executive floor. His retirement schedule left almost no free moments anymore, yet he remained standing there longer than necessary, watching the exchange unfold below. His expression never hardened, nor did he step in to rescue Eleanor. He merely observed with the patience of someone collecting another piece of a puzzle that had taken years to complete. Then, without saying a single word, he continued toward his office. Eleanor never saw him. Nathan never realized he had an audience. But several longtime employees exchanged uncertain glances after the founder disappeared behind the closing elevator doors. They had worked with Richard Hale long enough to recognize one habit. Whenever he became unusually quiet, important decisions usually followed. None of them could have explained why that ordinary Monday suddenly felt different, but by lunchtime, an uneasy feeling had settled across the executive floor, as if the building itself had begun waiting for something no calendar mentioned yet. The afternoon unfolded with the relentless pace only a successful company could produce. Contracts arrived missing signatures, financial models required urgent corrections, an important client presentation contained outdated figures, and an operations dashboard suddenly displayed conflicting data only hours before it was scheduled for the board meeting. Eleanor moved through each problem almost invisibly. She corrected the numbers before finance noticed them, coordinated 3 departments without claiming authority over any of them, located archived documents everyone else believed had been lost, and quietly saved a presentation that later earned standing applause from senior executives who never learned whose work they were actually presenting. To Eleanor, this wasn't heroism, it was simply another Monday. Yet somewhere behind the polished walls and framed awards, another pair of eyes had noticed every small decision she made. Late that afternoon, a short message appeared on her screen. Richard Hale requests the archive reports in person. She read it twice. In 19 years, the founder had almost never asked for documents directly from her. Taking a careful breath, she gathered the binders and headed toward the executive corridor, unaware that the simple walk down that quiet hallway would become the first step in a story the entire company would soon be forced to witness. If you think you already know why the founder asked for her personally, you're probably overlooking the one detail everyone else ignored. By Tuesday morning, Meridian Dynamics no longer felt like an office preparing for another business quarter. It felt like a theater, minutes before the curtain rose. Every television in the lobby displayed a countdown to Richard Hale's retirement ceremony. Florists carried arrangements through the revolving doors. Technicians adjusted the massive LED screen in the auditorium. Photographers tested camera angles from the balconies, and assistants rushed between conference rooms with color-coded schedules that changed by the hour. Employees who normally spent their mornings buried in spreadsheets suddenly found themselves rehearsing applause, discussing seating charts, and wondering who would be mentioned during the founder's final address. Richard Hale had built the company from a rented warehouse into an industry leader, and no one wanted to miss the last speech of the man whose signature still hung beneath the company's mission statement. Yet beneath the polished excitement lived another conversation that traveled faster than any official memo. Nathan Hale would soon become the face of Meridian. Some debated when the announcement would happen. Others debated only how dramatic Richard would make it. Very few questioned whether it would happen at all. Nathan certainly didn't. He moved through the building, greeting directors like a man already accepting congratulations, speaking confidently about our next chapter and my future vision, without ever saying the words CEO out loud. He didn't need to. Everyone around him filled in the blank themselves. Eleanor, meanwhile, treated the day exactly like every other. While executives practiced speeches, she worked through a growing stack of operational issues that somehow always found their way to her desk. A supplier contract contained an overlooked compliance error. An important investor presentation referenced outdated production figures. One department accidentally scheduled 2 executive meetings in the same boardroom at the same time. None of these problems would ever appear in Richard Hale's farewell speech. Yet any one of them could embarrass the company in front of guests arriving from across the country. Eleanor quietly untangled each issue, calling departments, updating records, checking details one final time before sending everything back as though nothing had ever gone wrong. Younger employees noticed her calm and asked for advice. She always gave it without making them feel inexperienced. Several of them privately admitted they had learned more from watching Eleanor work than from years of corporate training sessions. She smiled, wished them luck, and returned to her notebook before anyone could thank her for too long. Recognition had never become a habit in her life, and she no longer expected it. Unknown to her, Richard Hale had spent years reading reports that mentioned the same pattern over and over again. Whenever a project seemed impossible to rescue, someone somewhere had quietly written 2 words near the bottom of an email: "Ask Eleanor." Shortly before lunch, the executive dining room filled with department heads, board members, and invited guests rehearsing polite conversations over expensive meals. Nathan naturally became the center of attention. Someone joked that he should start measuring the CEO's office for new furniture. Another executive raised a glass and laughed that the company would finally have young blood in the corner office. Nathan accepted every compliment with practiced humility that fooled almost no one, but sounded convincing enough in public. Then his eyes wandered across the room and landed on Eleanor, who had entered only to deliver revised briefing folders requested by the event team. An opportunity for another performance appeared too tempting to ignore. "Perfect timing," Nathan announced loudly enough for nearby tables to hear. "If anyone needs proof that loyalty deserves a medal, just look at Eleanor. 19 years, same quiet smile, same notebook. Meridian changes products every year, but somehow she remains our most reliable piece of office furniture." Laughter rolled across the room again, softer this time, mixed with uncomfortable smiles from people who wished someone else would change the subject. Eleanor simply placed the folders on the table and answered, "Everything you need for this afternoon is inside. I hope it helps the ceremony run smoothly." Her voice carried no anger, which somehow made Nathan's joke feel even smaller. As she turned to leave, she noticed Richard Hale entering through another door. Their eyes met for only a second. He gave the slightest nod, nothing dramatic, nothing anyone else seemed to notice. But it was the first personal acknowledgement he had ever offered her in nearly 2 decades. Nathan missed it completely. The afternoon settled over Meridian like the quiet air before a summer storm. Guests filled the auditorium 1 row at a time. Former executives returned to shake hands with retired colleagues. Employees dressed more formally than usual, eager to witness a moment destined for company history. Giant screens displayed photographs spanning 4 decades. The tiny warehouse where Meridian began, the first production team, early prototypes, ribbon-cutting ceremonies, international expansions, and hundreds of smiling faces that had helped build the company. The images reminded everyone that businesses were measured not only by profits, but by people who stayed when success was still uncertain. Richard Hale waited alone behind the stage, reviewing a speech that surprisingly contained very few financial achievements. Instead, page after page spoke about trust, responsibility, and the kind of leadership that revealed itself only when no one was watching. Outside, Nathan adjusted his tie, glanced toward the reserved front row seat with his family name engraved on a polished brass plaque, and smiled with complete confidence. From where he stood, the future looked settled, almost ceremonial. He had no reason to believe that his father's final speech would begin by challenging the very assumption on which his entire career had quietly rested. The ceremony is about to begin, but the most important moment hasn't appeared on the schedule, and no one in the auditorium is prepared for it. Before the founder says another word, let me ask you something. Who deserves to lead a company? Someone born into the family, or someone who earned every opportunity? Share your opinion below and subscribe if you're enjoying the story. The applause filled the auditorium as Richard Hale stepped onto the stage for the final time as Meridian Dynamics founder. Nearly every seat was occupied. Employees stood along the walls, former executives filled the front rows, cameras pointed toward the podium, and a giant screen behind him displayed a single sentence: celebrating 42 years of leadership. Nathan sat confidently in the front row, exchanging polite smiles with board members who already treated him like the company's next leader. He had rehearsed this moment in his mind for years. The retirement speech would end with a graceful introduction, a few words about the future, and then Richard would publicly pass the torch. At least, that was how everyone believed the afternoon would unfold. Richard thanked the employees who had built Meridian from a small startup into an industry leader, but after only a few minutes, his speech changed direction. Instead of talking about revenue, acquisitions, or market share, he began speaking about people whose names never appeared in annual reports. When a company succeeds, he said, his voice calm but unmistakably firm, the spotlight usually finds the executives. But over the years, I've learned that the strongest pillars of a company are often the people standing farthest from that spotlight. The ones who solve problems before anyone notices them. The ones who stay loyal when nobody is watching. The ones who protect the company without asking for recognition. The room grew noticeably quieter. Even the photographers lowered their cameras. Nathan's smile weakened. This wasn't the speech he expected. Richard closed the folder containing his prepared remarks and stepped away from the podium. "Before I retire," he continued, "there is one person I want every employee in this room to recognize." His eyes slowly moved across the audience until they stopped near the middle rows. "Eleanor Brooks, would you please come to the stage?" For a moment, nobody moved. Eleanor looked around in confusion, convinced he must have meant someone else. A manager beside her gently whispered, "He's talking to you." Hundreds of heads turned in the same direction. Conversations disappeared. Nathan's expression froze. He watched Eleanor stand slowly, still holding the same worn notebook she carried every morning through the lobby. She wasn't dressed like an executive. She wasn't seated with senior leadership. Most of the invited guests had no idea who she even was. Yet the founder of a multi-billion-dollar company was waiting for her. As Eleanor walked toward the stage, whispers spread across the auditorium faster than applause. "Who is she?" one investor quietly asked. "Operations," someone guessed. "No, compliance?" another answered. Longtime employees simply exchanged knowing glances. They had worked beside Eleanor for years, but even they couldn't understand why Richard Hale had interrupted the biggest ceremony in the company's history for someone who had spent 19 years avoiding attention. Nathan remained seated, but his confidence had vanished. His eyes never left his father, searching for some explanation that refused to come. Eleanor finally reached the stage and stopped beside Richard. He smiled warmly, shook her hand with both of his, and turned back toward the audience. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, "I'd like you to meet one of the finest leaders this company has ever had." The auditorium fell into complete silence. For several long seconds, no one applauded. The silence itself became the loudest sound in the auditorium. Nathan stared at his father as if he had misheard him. Around the room, board members exchanged puzzled looks, investors leaned toward one another, and employees who had worked beside Eleanor for years suddenly realized they knew surprisingly little about the quiet woman standing under the stage lights. Eleanor herself looked just as stunned. "Mr. Hale," she began softly, but Richard raised a reassuring hand with a gentle smile. "I know exactly what I'm saying," he replied before turning back to the audience. "Many of you are wondering why you've never heard her name before. That's precisely the point." He took a slow breath and walked across the stage, no longer reading from notes. 19 years ago, Eleanor joined Meridian in an entry-level operations role. She never asked for special treatment. She never asked for a promotion she hadn't earned. She never tried to impress me. A photograph appeared on the screen behind them, not of Eleanor receiving an award, but of an old project team from nearly 2 decades earlier. She stood in the back row, almost hidden behind taller colleagues. "Over the years," Richard continued, "I've watched managers come and go. I've watched executives chase titles, bonuses, and headlines. But whenever this company faced a crisis, one name kept appearing in reports I requested personally." Another slide appeared. Internal emails with one sentence highlighted. "Ask Eleanor." Then another, and another. Different departments, different years, different managers, the same 2 words. A quiet murmur spread through the audience. Richard smiled. No one planned this. No one coordinated it. Whenever something truly mattered, people trusted the same person. He looked toward Eleanor. She corrected mistakes before clients ever saw them. She trained employees who later became directors. She protected projects without expecting credit. More than once, she quietly prevented decisions that could have cost this company millions, not by seeking attention, but by doing the work everyone else overlooked. Several executives lowered their eyes. They recognized some of those projects. Until that moment, many had believed the success belonged to their departments. Nathan finally stood. "Father," he interrupted, trying to remain composed, "no one is questioning her dedication, but this is a retirement ceremony, not an employee recognition event." Richard turned toward him calmly. "No, Nathan," his voice remained steady. "This is exactly an employee recognition event. It should have happened years ago." The room became perfectly still again. Richard walked back beside Eleanor. "For too long, we've confused visibility with value. The loudest voices aren't always the strongest leaders. Real leadership is measured by trust, and trust cannot be inherited." Nathan's jaw tightened. Those last 4 words landed harder than anyone expected. Then Richard reached into the inside pocket of his jacket and removed a sealed company envelope bearing the Meridian Dynamics crest. "I've spent years preparing this transition," he said, "and after careful consideration, I want everyone here to know that effective immediately," he looked at Eleanor, "I'm promoting Eleanor Brooks to Executive Vice President of Operations." The audience gasped, almost in unison. It wasn't the top position everyone expected, but it was one of the most powerful roles in the company, placing Eleanor above executives who had ignored her for years, including several who had laughed along with Nathan only days earlier. Nathan's face drained of color. For the first time in his career, he realized his last name had not guaranteed the future he had already claimed as his own. The applause began cautiously, almost as if people were waiting for someone else to decide how they should react. Then a group of longtime employees stood first. They were the people who had worked beside Eleanor for years, who had watched her arrive before sunrise, stay long after meetings ended, and quietly rescue projects that carried someone else's name. One by one, others rose to their feet. Within moments, the entire auditorium was standing. The ovation wasn't for a surprise promotion. It was for a truth many had ignored until someone finally had the courage to say it out loud. Eleanor looked across the room with tears gathering in her eyes, not because she had finally been recognized, but because the faces applauding her were the same people she had helped without ever expecting anything in return. Nathan remained seated until the applause faded. He forced a polite smile and walked toward the stage, extending his hand. "Congratulations," he said, careful to keep his voice steady. "I didn't realize my father had made this decision." Richard answered before Eleanor could. "That's because this decision wasn't made yesterday, Nathan. It was made over years of observation." He looked at the audience instead of his son. "Leadership isn't a reward handed out during a ceremony. It's something people quietly earn long before anyone announces it." There was no anger in his voice, no humiliation, no public attack. The lesson was firm, but dignified. Nathan slowly lowered his hand, understanding that arguing would only confirm everything his father had just said. The following Monday, Meridian Dynamics felt different. Eleanor's office had changed, but she hadn't. She still arrived before most employees, still carried the same worn notebook, and still stopped to greet the security guards and receptionists by name. The only difference was that people no longer looked through her. Managers who had once dismissed her opinions now asked for her advice before making important decisions. Younger employees no longer hesitated to knock on her door because they knew they would be heard. Her first decision as executive vice president wasn't to replace people or settle old scores. Instead, she introduced a company-wide recognition program designed to celebrate employees whose work usually happened behind the scenes. "If success depends on invisible people," she told her leadership team, "they should never remain invisible." Richard Heir officially retired that afternoon. As he left the building for the last time, he paused in the lobby beside the bronze statue that had welcomed employees for decades. Nathan joined him in silence. After a long moment, Richard placed a hand on his son's shoulder. "A family name can open a door," he said quietly. "But only character decides whether people want you to stay in the room." Nathan didn't answer. For the first time, he wasn't thinking about titles or offices. He was thinking about everything he had mistaken for leadership. Months later, Meridian Dynamics was still growing, but employees spoke about the retirement ceremony for a different reason than the newspapers did. The headlines remembered the unexpected promotion. The people inside the company remembered something else entirely. They remembered the day the founder proved that loyalty mattered, quiet excellence could no longer be overlooked, and respect had to be earned rather than inherited. Eleanor never became the loudest voice in the building. She didn't need to. She had become something far more powerful, the kind of leader people trusted even when no one was watching. The bronze inscription beneath Richard Heir's statue remained unchanged. "Companies don't outlive people. Values do." After that day, no one walked past those words without reading them, and no one ever looked at the quiet woman with the worn notebook the same way again.